My name is Ruel. I'm a research fellow in the Poverty, Health and Nutrition Division here at IFPRI, and it's a pleasure for me to welcome you here. I'm delighted to welcome you to this event, which is the Global Survey of School Meal Programs, Implications and Perspectives. This is a joint event with the Global Child Nutrition Foundation and IFPRI. And we have an exciting program laid out for you this morning. And I'll introduce Ryan Kennedy, who will talk us through the details of the event. Thank you very much.
Hello. Thank you, everyone, for coming out today. I'll keep my remarks reasonably brief. I just wanted to introduce you guys all to today's seminar. We will have a couple live panels, which will be discussing the results of the survey, which will be presented by Arlene and Mamta, and some opening remarks by some experts in the field, followed by some open discussion facilitated in the back of this room. But to begin the opening remarks, I would like to introduce the Executive Director of the Global Child Nutrition Foundation, Arlene Mitchell, who will lead us off with the opening remarks. Thank you so much.
Hi, everyone. I want to welcome you today. I think I know most of you, but this is an exciting chance for us to talk to people who work alongside us and with us in the field of child nutrition and school feeding specifically. We're very excited to be here today, and we're even more excited to have our online audience, which means that partners around the world are able to dial in and listen as well. You're going to see quite a bit of me today because I'm going to be presenting a bit on the survey, but I want to take this opportunity to really thank IFPRI for hosting us and for all of our speakers and facilitators who've agreed to help us out today with various parts of the morning. We have a very august panel of people who will be speaking to you now, and it's my honor to present them. We have first Dr. Marie Ruel, who has been with IFPRI for many years, and most of you know her name because she is a leading expert on health and nutrition and food security. She is the Director of Poverty, Health and Nutrition Division here in IFPRI, and a wonderful partner in all that we do, all of the studies around child nutrition, maternal and child nutrition, food security, and poverty. After Marie speaks, we will have Catherine Bertini. Catherine is very hard to introduce because she has so many wonderful hats and experiences. I first knew of her as the head of the Food and Nutrition Service in USDA, where I was working in another section. But then she became my boss's boss's boss when I moved to WFP. She was the executive director of WFP for many years. And since then, she has worn so many hats it's hard to explain. But she works at the Chicago Council for International Affairs. She has been a professor in master's program at Syracuse University. She's been a fellow at Gates Foundation in the agricultural team, and now with Rockefeller Foundation. And she is a world expert on food security and gender issues as well. It's been a joy working with Catherine over the years. After Catherine speaks, we have Benjamin Muskovitz. For many of you know, he's the director of the Food Assistance Division in the Foreign Agricultural Service in the Department of Agriculture. And they have been very generous sponsors of the survey that we're reporting on today. Ben has a Master's of Public Policy and International Policy Analysis from Duke, and has had a number of policy and project management positions across the government, and is a great partner with our work as well. Following Benjamin is Daniel Balaban. Daniel it has been and remains a major force in school feeding around the world, but his starting point was in Brazil, where he had a major role in the school meal program in Brazil, which has become quite famous, and in the Zero Hunger campaign, which you all know of as well. Daniel was on the Global Child Nutrition Foundation's board for for years before he joined WFP as the director of the Center of Excellence in Brazil, Center of Excellence Against Hunger. And they've been fabulous partners with the Global Child Nutrition Foundation in the area of school meal programs. So we welcome each of you speakers to the podium. We'll start with Marie, and we want to be really efficient with time and energy so that we can have robust discussions with all of you and to involve all of you. So thanks again, IFPRI, for hosting us. Thanks to our online audience for tuning in, and we want to get underway with the program. So I'll welcome Marie to this microphone.
Good morning, everyone. It's really my pleasure to host this event today and to welcome you to IFPRI. You know that IFPRI has been involved in school feeding and food for education, or whatever name we give to those programs that target schools. We've been involved in those for several years. We have the approach of research. We're not implementing programs. And so we have looked at different aspects of the programs, their impacts on different outcomes. We as nutritionists always had a certain concern when we saw that in some countries school feeding programs were the nutrition intervention that was provided by the government. And we were concerned that this meant that maybe the government was neglecting other age groups. So if we have been critical in the past, it was not that we don't believe that school feeding programs or school programs are important. It's that they're not sufficient. We also need to prepare the children to go to school, and so we do need to focus on the first 1,000 days. And I think by now we all agree on that, but it took a while, and it took nutritionists to look like they were against school feeding, which we're not. At IFPRI, we've had people that have worked on this topic and, as I said, have done evaluations, looked at implementation issues, looked at impacts for decades. Two of the people that are here today, Aulo and Harold, that you will hear later, have started this work way before joining IFPRI, and have continued while at IFPRI. And we have others in Bangladesh, for example, actor Ahmed has done very, very good work on school programs and on programs that aim to bring girls to schools, reducing gender inequities. But we are not experts in implementation, and we are here to listen to issues related to implementation, but also to how that survey can help strengthen some aspects of implementation. I just have one slide that I wanted to show that summarizes how we feel about these kinds of programs in terms, and this is a slide I borrowed and added on from Aulo, where we really see school meals and school programs in general as a platform. The meal itself is important, the type of intervention targeted to children in school is important, but there's so much more that we can do with using the school as a platform. So, of course, school feeding programs are programs that provide social protection. They are targeted usually to poor households, to children from poor environments, and they provide a kind of social protection and help families feed their children better and use some of the money they don't need to spend on school meals for other children. The platform is also an excellent way and has been used to deliver health and nutrition interventions. There has been more health than nutrition so far, we feel, but it's coming. I think when we have all of this captive audience there, we should really continue to take advantage of the fact that there are lots of things we can do to improve the nutrition. The adolescents, among others, are important during this period. Adolescent girls, this is a platform where we can reach a lot of them. They need to be prepared for pregnancy and prepare for motherhood. Boys need to be prepared for fatherhood as well. So it's a place where we can deliver, for example, micronutrients for some target children, depending on their age. We can deliver education, nutrition education, and counseling. This is an age where children absorb everything and are starting to make their own decisions. So it's very important to use the school meal platform for these purposes. Of course, it's key for education. We have seen impacts on enrollment, on attendance, sometimes more impacts on girls. So those are very important as well for their role as future parents, as I mentioned. And then it has also been used to train and to produce food. There has been some very interesting initiatives related to reaching parents also through agriculture tied to school meals in school. Of course, we know that school meal programs are a critical input for achieving 7 of the SDGs. I don't need to tell you that you have already, WFP has already documented that, but I think it's an important thing to remember how many of the SDGs actually really need school interventions and especially school interventions that link nutrition and health as well. So in conclusion, one of the aspects that I was provided with 3 of the case studies, the nice 2-pagers that have been produced from the survey for 3 countries. And what I found particularly interesting was that there is a section at the end that asks, has research been done on your school meals, and what are your priorities for research? And to my great satisfaction, all 3 mentioned that they really would like to have evaluations of impact, cost effectiveness, cost benefit evaluations, as well as implementation research to understand what's working and what's not working. So this is really something for us that is very reassuring. People don't think that they just need to roll those things and everything will be fine. We need more information. We need more data, and the survey in itself is a case for which you all have recognized that we need this information and we need a good start. But I was particularly pleased to see the demand coming from the countries as well in terms of more research on this topic. Thank you.
And now we welcome Catherine Bertini to speak.
Thank you very much. Being at IFPRI is always exciting because this is where some of the most exciting ideas not only are born but are developed. And certainly I know from my time at WFP and in the other roles I've had since then that research that comes from IFPRI has been the base of a lot of what I do. So thank you, IFPRI, for hosting us. And Arlene, the Global Child Nutrition Foundation, now I think about 10 years old, has been already exciting and more exciting every year in the way that it reaches out throughout the world to people who are working on helping to ensure that children are fed. And its work has, in these 10 years, really only just begun because there's so much more that they can do. But I'm glad to be here also because I know that Arlene in particular and many, many other people, both listening and around the world, have been involved in the issues of promoting school feeding for a long time. I was looking in my files before I came, and I found a book co-authored by the World Food Program, UNESCO, and the World Health Organization in 1999 that is advice to communities that might want to put school feeding programs together. So I thought, well, that's at least when we started trying to think about how to put together some guidance. Then, of course, we're always promoting the idea of the importance of education for girls. And in the 98, 99, 2000, 2001 timeframe, George McGovern was the ambassador in Rome from the U.S., and of course he came one day and said, you know, really we should make sure that every child in the world has the opportunity for a meal at school. And he pushed very strongly about this within the U.S. government and in Rome, where not everyone on the governing board of WFP was thrilled with the idea. But I found also in my files some of the articles he wrote, some of the work he did, the testimony that I gave on the Hill, and what President Clinton did when McGovern went to him. Interesting footnote, Bill Clinton, young Bill Clinton, was the Texas campaign coordinator for presidential candidate George McGovern. So when George called on President Clinton and said, "Would you help?" he said, "Okay, how?" And that was at least the beginning of a much bigger push on school feeding. Meanwhile, Arlene had agreed to run the school feeding program at the World Food Program, and no one could have been better at it, because one of the first things she said was, we need to find out where there are school feeding programs all over the world. And she engaged a whole group of graduate students. I'm not sure she even paid them beyond their expenses, or a tiny bit of money. She sent graduate students all over the world to assess every single country and what the status was of their school feeding programs. So, WFP's archives must be bursting with the kind of little stuff I found here. You must have a lot of things that could be useful for this now beyond, and especially in this program that they are putting together now at GCNF. And I can't wait to hear more about it from the folks here. But I know when we started, I also found the WFP school feeding program result of baseline surveys, because for the countries where WFP was operating, before we got this new money, we wanted to know what the status was, because we wanted to keep that money, now called McGovern-Dole. We wanted to keep that money and be able to show Congress and to the U.S. government, this is where we were before, and this is where we are now as we go forward. So that was really important, as was the entire global school feeding program, and the big survey that was done initially. So I know how critically important this survey is, because some of the results from the last one, for instance, beyond that more children ate in school, were that the countries were able to start communicating with each other and share ideas. And now, of course, they do that through GCNF, not only at the big annual convention, which is so exciting, but in many other fora as well. Also, these graduate students became very much engaged. I understand a couple of them teach about related programming. Several of them went to work for a World Food Program. One or two went to IFPRI at one point in time. One went to Save the Children. I mean, they've been expanded, the kind of talent pool of experts in this area expanded as a result of these people being involved in this process. So more children in school, more understanding and sharing from countries about what works and what doesn't work, more experts in the field, and ultimately more investment. Not only more food and cash investment, but more intellectual investment, more national government commitment, and more commitment from the private sector to improving and expanding this work. So thank you, Global Child Nutrition Foundation, for what you've done in the past and what you're about to lead us through in the future today and beyond, as we have this great database being built for where children are eating all around the world and how. And thank you, U.S. government, USDA, USAID, and all those in U.S. government who helped move this from something that was important that we did on a project basis to something that is critical that we do on a national basis around the world. And thank you for all of the commitment of experts and support from you, support from the private sector, because this is a movement that is not only critically important, but that has legs and wings. Thank you.
Thank you, Catherine. And now Ben.
Thank you. Good morning. It's nice to see so many familiar faces. This is my first meeting with GCNF, so I think it's long overdue, but something that I'm going to continue to be involved in, and I'm quite excited to be a part of. Just a little background, I know that Arlene came to see us, was it summer of year? It was a couple years ago to talk about the global survey and to come as ask for funding. And we immediately recognized the importance of the work that was done and the information that can be gathered from such a survey. We face challenges every year in terms of justifying to our stakeholders up on the Hill to the importance of school feeding, its impact on what we're doing, and most importantly, the rate of return, which is something that's, I think, is exceptionally difficult, one that we've struggled here in the United States domestically, even though we've been doing school feeding for many decades, one that is something that's becoming increasingly more important. So performance metrics showing that rate of return to all donors involved is becoming an important component of what we do. So I wanted to, and I conveniently forgot my reading glasses just so I may be squinting a little. So we wanted to welcome you here today to join us in this overview and discussion of the findings of the school feeding survey. We think it's a much needed and important study to map out the existing school feeding programs in the world, and USDA is very proud to be part of this exciting effort as we continue to improve the implementation of our own McGovern-Dole school feeding programs and our sort of nascent local and regional procurement program, which is now going on its third year as an ever increasing in appropriations that we're quite proud of. As Catherine indicated earlier about her meetings with the ambassador and former Senator McGovern, that this program is named in honor of and him and Senator Robert Dole for their efforts to increase global commitment to school feeding and nutrition. We're very proud to address the needs of the neglected group of school-age children through the McGovern-Dole program. McGovern-Dole, as you know, supports food security and nutrition for school feeding by providing technical and in-kind support to many of the world's poorest children and their schools, their families, and their communities. The McGovern-Dole program provides donations of U.S. agricultural products as well as financial and technical assistance for school feeding, maternal and child nutrition projects in low-income, food deficit countries that are committed to universal education. Since its inception, McGovern-Dole has supported projects in 44 countries. Today, it continues to support 34 projects in 25 countries. Under the McGovern-Dole program's active awards, we have purchased over 300,000 metric tons of commodities, including fortified milled rice, corn-soy blend plus, fortified vegetables, all from domestically sourced U.S. agriculture. The McGovern School Program supports not only nutrition but literacy and other enrichment activities in school meals to create a comprehensive foundation and education system. One of the most powerful impacts of school meals is school participation, including both enrollment and attendance. There's a strong body of evidence that supports that children benefiting from school meals attend school more regularly, thanks to the incentive the meal offers to families who face opportunity costs might otherwise take children out of the school to perform other work. It's somewhat of a changing of the priorities in which we're trying to make this happen. It's a slow, gradual change, but we think the value and the importance of continuing these types of programs creates a different paradigm, creates a different incentive for those families that are included in this. School meals, as was mentioned earlier, also supports gender objectives in education and human capital development, which increasing girls' enrollment and attendance, and an explicit objective of the most low-income country schools, which is part of the McGovern-Dole key objectives. Thanks in part to school meals, increased enrollments and attendance globally has been especially remarkable for girls, who are typically far more likely than boys to be taken out of school when families lack resources. The effect is particularly strong when take-home rations are a part of the equation. This is something that we do at USDA, something that's valued in parts of our programs that we look for, and something that we think shows a great deal of promise in integration of programs. In the 2013, and the data is a little old, I will admit, the state of school feeding produced by the World Bank and WFP reported that girls' enrollment increased by as much as 46% and reduced dropout rates over time when both on-site and take-home rations were offered. A little more updated is that the gender gap in school enrollment has nearly closed worldwide, according to 2016 data. Yet the gap persists in large parts of Africa, Middle East, and Southern Asia, and school meals clearly have an important role to play in those regions. School meals also provide primary health components such as complementary water, sanitation and hygiene measures, clinical health activities that are common in our McGovern-Dole school programs like deworming, screening referrals, and malaria prevention. These activities can reduce health-related absences. However, the full extent of the impact interventions and educational outcomes is still being explored. Since this grant was given to GCNF, they have completed their requirements for on-time reporting. We are quite pleased about that. It's not something that we sometimes struggle with that with the people that we support in the field. So Arlene, thank you very much for staying on top of that. And we look forward to a strong and continued partnership and the results of this survey, which can only help us all as we move forward in proving to outside stakeholders and in my plea to other donors to start to support school feeding in a manner in which the U.S. Department of Agriculture does currently. Thank you very much for this opportunity.
Thank you, Ben. And again, we wouldn't be able to do this survey without USDA support, so thank you very much. And we'll try to keep those reports coming in on time. You all know what I'm talking about. That's not always easy. Now, Daniel Balaban, please join us.
Good morning. I would like first to congratulate IFPRI and GCNF for this wonderful event and congratulate USDA and GCNF for this global survey. I believe that we are living a crucial moment, a moment of choices. We need to understand what we need to do to support countries to create and to strengthen their national school feeding programs. So it's really important to understand what's going on around the world in terms of school feeding. We use it to do some surveys just on with non-development countries to understand what their needs. But this survey, as I know, will be a global survey, not just with non-development countries, but also with developed countries. We need to take more examples, good examples, what the ways to going forward, the ways that are going right, the good examples that we have around the world. I'm very happy because 2 years ago, we organized jointly with the African Union a survey on the African continent. And this survey showed the development of national school feeding policies in the continent, in the African continent, showing the commitment of governments to create and to strengthen national policies. Nowadays, we have several African countries, even they are poor countries, they are putting money in their own budgets for school feeding. And this is fantastic because 10 years ago we didn't find this. Now they believe in themselves. They believe in school feeding and they are putting money from their own budgets, poor budgets, but they are putting some money to create national policies. I will give you some examples. It's important. Kenya has developed its school meals and nutrition strategy for the next 5 years. And reaching 1.6 million children in the country. Côte d'Ivoire approved a school feeding policy and a strategy to transition to a national program. And now Côte d'Ivoire created a center of excellence for school feeding to the West Africa region. So it's fantastic what they are doing. Benin approved its program frameworks and components which made the government mobilize $8 million. Benin. $8 million just for school feeding from its own budget. Burundi is a poor country and approved its national policy. Burkina Faso approved its national program and is elaborating a school feeding strategy in the country. Sierra Leone, Senegal, will develop a strategy for investing in school feeding. So just to give some few examples of what is happening in Africa. In Asia also, we will organize jointly with GCNF the next Global Child Nutrition Forum in Cambodia. And Cambodia asked to host the forum there. It's fantastic. They want to show what they are doing. They want to show the examples that they have, and we will share these examples with other countries in Asia, Africa, and Latin America. It's important to say that all countries now, they have national policies. And if we want, we as supporters, continue working with them, we need to listen more to what they need. We cannot try to impose what we want to them. We need to listen more, listen, and understand their needs, and understand their problems, understand their solutions. They have in their hands, in their minds, the solutions for their problems. What we as supporters need to do is technical assistance, is organize their thoughts with them, listen to them, and working with them. They need to take the leadership of the process. We cannot continue leading them. They will lead us. We need to change our mindset if we want other countries to create national policies. I believe in a quote of Benjamin Franklin that I like most. Is he used it to say, "Tell me and I forget. Teach me and I may remember. Involve me and I learn." What we need is to involve the governments, work with them since the beginning in national projects, and they will continue. They will show us that they have commitment, that they can organize national school feeding policies. That's what we need to do for the next years. I'm very happy for this survey, Arlene. I think that we need to understand the survey results as key recommendations for the future of school feeding programs around the world. We need what we need to do, how we can support, and who we can support. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Please join me in thanking all of the speakers. And we know you have very busy schedules. We'd love you to stay with us, but if you need to leave, we understand. So please, thank you very much for your remarks. Now I'm going to give an overview of the survey. Let me get this up here. Here we go. First of all, what is the survey? The survey is a standard set of questions that were with standard definitions. The survey is accompanied with a glossary so that we're trying to get similar understanding of each of the questions. So all of the possibly confusing, more technical terms for the survey in the survey are defined, and we have translated the survey into 7 key languages. We'll talk a bit about that in a minute. We're asking all countries in the world, and our count has there being 197 countries. We're using the UN definition of country, and there are some questions about is this really a country or not, but we're taking that list and we're working from that list. And our goal is to get results from at least 150 countries by the end of the survey. We're asking about large-scale school feeding programs, national scale as a rule, but in some countries, large scale is much smaller than in other countries. And so we have a definition of what large scale means. And we ask countries that have programs of that scale to report on those programs. Some countries have more than one program, of course, and we try to capture the difference between those programs to the extent possible. We plan to do this survey every 2 to 3 years, because we're trying to capture trends, et cetera, not just a one-time shot. And we began early this year. The survey will enable countries to share and compare data within and between programs. It will help them to identify strengths, weaknesses, needs, and trends, but we're very careful to say this is not an evaluation. We're not judging your program. We're just asking you to report facts. It will hopefully help us to realize where big data gaps exist, and we already know some of those data gaps, so we very specifically ask about some things that people might not have captured data on, but we're hoping over time that by asking these questions, people will start to gather data in those areas. We are hoping to use the survey to help countries learn from each other better, because we'll know more about their similarities and differences, and to invest with deeper knowledge of what's happening in the school feeding world and what else is possible within a school meal program to invest in. It will hopefully help to direct efforts to the areas of greatest need and show progress over time. One of the things that we've observed in our forums every year is, as Daniel was saying, the growth in national commitment, particularly in low-income countries. And that's something that's not really captured anywhere in data that we can find in school meal programs. We might know about one country or one effort, but we don't know across the world whether governments are truly embracing and investing more, and within a program, what they're investing in. And we believe that the survey results will help countries to better advocate for their own programs, within their own governments or with their donor partners or others. We involved a lot of people, many of you are in the room, in one way or another in developing the survey. We had 22 experts who reviewed core contents. We had 10 who actually reviewed draft questionnaires. And we tried to get a good sampling from around the world of experts to join us. So we worked with what was NAPAD, now called IUDA, the New Partnership for Africa's Development. We worked with FAO, IFPRI. We had a lot of help from Alo and Harold. And we had 5 universities. The main university working with us is the University of Washington, based in Seattle, where we're based as well. The World Food Program, of course, has been very involved in the program. Private sector, we had a couple of private sector groups have a look at the survey, and GCNF board of directors, a couple of folks there also contributed. The organizations that contributed are listed here, universities, and we've had a number of professors and a lot of graduate students in particular involved, USDA, of course, and they are funding a large portion, but we're coming up with about 80% of the cost of the survey from GCNF itself. And then WFP was particularly helpful in the early translations of the survey. What topics does the survey cover? We've divided the survey in 3 main sections. 2, as in purple on the screen, are national level questions. So we start with basically, do you have a program? And if the answer is no, we say, are you planning a program in the near future? If the answer is no, that's the end of your survey. But if you do say you have at least one program, then we ask a few questions about the national context of that program. Then we get into the very program-specific activities. So many countries that we've already got responses from, for example, have a McGovern-Dole program, but they also have a national program of some type. And so we are asking each of those programs to be separately described because they have different characteristics, one program to the other. This has been particularly challenging for countries to do a separate program discussion on each program that they have. We've gotten one country has as many as 5 separate large-scale programs that they're reporting on, so it gets a bit complex there. And then at the end of the survey, we ask questions about whether they've suffered any emergency that might have affected their program. In some cases, emergencies mean that you scale up your program to address need, and sometimes it means you're unable to feed children at school because the schools have been damaged or whatever. So we want to know if something like that has happened in the recent past. The whole survey is based on the most recently completed school year, so we're asking historical data. We're not trying to get data from a school year that's in process. So in most cases, we're talking about school year 2017-18, or in a calendar year school year, it's 2018. We also ask a little bit about the education system and infrastructure. And then in the section that Marie was talking about, we ask about particular successes, particular challenges, and what kind of research they have done that might be of interest to the rest of the world, and what kind of research they feel is still needed. I won't go into all of these, but I want to give some sense of the actual questions in each section. Section A at the national level, as I mentioned, is about whether you have a program or not. Questions about how many children receive food at school across the whole country, not program by program, how long the school year is, and what month it started and ended. Also, do you have policies for school feeding? Do you have policies for nutrition? Do you have standards for nutrition, agriculture, and overall school feeding policies are basically those three questions. What's the government's financial contribution? A very tough question to get answered, but we're trying. Are there any food items that are prohibited, and why? Are there food restrictions on or near the schools? Do you have a coordinating body, because school feeding cuts across sectors, so coordination amongst government ministries, for example, is really important. And do you have a countrywide monitoring system, and what is that comprised of? The program section starts with an overview of the program, the name of the program, the year it started, the agency responsible for it in the government, the cost per year, a number of children, and we asked retrospective also. So we say, in the most recently completed school year, how many children were fed? A year before that, how many were fed? And 3 years before that, how many? Because we're trying to actually capture some trends already, even though we're starting with 2017-18. So it will give us a sense if they do have an upward or downward trend. We have objectives and modalities and some targeting questions. We ask if food used in the program is fortified or if they use biofortified food. Harvest Plus was here, so we're trying to do a pitch for you in this as well. Do they hire nutritionists? And if so, are they paid, and by whom? And where was the food prepared? We asked some kitchen type questions. Is it outdoor? Is it indoor? Are there facilities, et cetera? Then on complementary programs, we also talked about how important some of the complementary programs are. We have two sections. One is on basically hygiene and medical screening, et cetera. And then we ask complementary education. Are you doing nutrition education along with your school meal program? Do you have food and agriculture education linked? Do you have school gardens, et cetera? We also ask if those programs are mandatory or they're just in the program itself, they're not mandatory from a national level. In the school garden question, there's always a question of what do you do with the product? Do you sell it? Do you use it in your school meal program or whatever? And we started to ask a high-level question on obesity. Are you taking steps to prevent or mitigate obesity? Then we ask questions about food sourcing, in kind, either domestic or foreign, purchased, and where do you purchase? If it's from a local source, is it done competitively? Do you use packaged and processed food, and from where do you get that if you do? We ask governance and leadership questions, and which agencies have responsibility for which aspects of the program. We ask more funding and budgeting questions. We're trying to ask that 3 or 4 different ways so we can try to triangulate, since it's a very hard question for countries to answer. The biggest problems we're having are actually with the number questions on finances and numbers of children. It never quite adds up. So it's a struggle. We ask if they get external funding and from whom, and some percentage breakdown of costs between food, handling, transport, storage, and one-time fixed costs. We ask if the student families contribute and how, and whether they had adequate funding to cover the planned program. Then we get into one of my favorite areas, which is agriculture. Are you involving your farmers, and if so, how? Is the private sector involved in your program, and how? In private sector, we ask more kind of what types of things are they doing? Is it the transport sector, or is it processing sector? And we ask how many cooks are involved, and if there's a special target for women in that context. Are they paid, and how are they paid? And is any special training or certification required if they're going to serve as cooks or caterers in the program? One of the interesting questions WFP or GCNF started to ask back at the 2014 forum was, how many people are employed through your school meal program? And we got some astounding results from 2 or 3 countries that were tracking the employment figures attached to their school meal program. So we've decided to ask about how many jobs were created by the program and in which kinds of fields of jobs. And we're getting some very interesting data on that. Is there a special focus on opportunities for women or for youth in your school meal program? Is the community engaged, and how? And is that a requirement or is that optional? And do the students themselves serve in any role, like preparation or serving or cleanup duties? As I mentioned earlier, we asked a couple of questions about whether they've suffered an emergency recently. We're back now to the national level questions. What their education infrastructure is like, very simple questions about the education infrastructure, successes and challenges, as I mentioned before, any major setbacks that they've had within the past 5 years, particular problems and challenges, and we ask about corruption and mismanagement, and everyone said you won't get anything. I'm very happy to say people are amazingly honest about what they're dealing with corruption and mismanagement issues. That doesn't mean they're solving them, but at least they're aware that they exist. So we ask if they've had any major studies of school feeding programs, and what research and studies might be helpful, as Marie was mentioning. I think we are getting information that demonstrates that people are serious about knowing what's going on in their program, and they're very curious about the impact. So this was designed to work through a government-identified focal point. We prefer government officials themselves responding to the survey if possible. Not always possible. Many of them turn to WFP or CRS or another partner to help them fill out at least the program sections. But we want them to understand the survey and what the data is telling them. So we're trying to involve them as a first step. And then that focal point that we identify within the government is responsible for consulting with whomever they need to get the data back to us. We are set up, well, I mentioned quickly some of the staffing structure we have, but we have associates who are generally young people at either recently graduated from university or have a master's degree program, or they're currently in a master's degree program that are following up with the focal points to make sure that they clarify and resolve questions as best we can. In the end, we produce a country report, which we have examples of here. And we're doing that now in English only, unfortunately. The survey itself is in 7 different languages, but we're not able yet, at least, to produce the country reports in 7 different languages or more. We piloted the survey design, we designed it in by September of last year. We piloted it in before our forum, and 3 countries, Benin, Nepal, and thank you, Ibo, the United States, completed the pilot and were really helpful in giving us feedback about what was working and not working in the survey. And then we shared that with the 61 countries that attended the forum last year in Tunis. Then we made modifications based on that. We made all of the translation changes, and we finished ready to roll out the survey for most countries by mid-January. We are still in the process of identifying focal points for some countries, but where we have focal points, we have moved forward. We are still, in many countries, we don't even know where in the government responsibility for school feeding resides. Particularly hard to know who to ask in a government that doesn't have a large-scale school meal program. Where do you go? Do you go to the Ministry of Education? Do you go to the Ministry of Health? Where do you go to even find out whether they have a large-scale program if you haven't, if we don't already have information about a program? We got a lot of information about potential focal points at the forum. We found out that many of them moved on, or they're not the right focal points, so we're still struggling with that. We do an official outreach with a formal letter to ask them to identify the focal point, and then we follow up with our regional coordinators and associates. We are underway now worldwide, and I'll move a little quicker to explain. We kind of divided the world in 3 sections. Mamta, who is with us here today, and will say a few remarks about her experience with Asia and Oceania, which is actually much broader than that. You have something like 80 countries, I think, that you're working with, and the associates. We have an associate who speaks Arabic based in Seattle who works with Mamta. We have a Russian speaker based in Kazakhstan who works with Mamta, and then we have 2 English speakers, one in Nepal and one in India that works with Mamta, who is based in Nepal herself. In Africa, on the right, you'll see Africa. Alice Martin, who many of you know, is leading the effort there. Liliane is in Burundi and is working mostly on East and Southern Africa. Olivier is in Congo and is working with countries in Francophone Africa, and Priscilla in Cameroon. And then the rest of the world is left to us in Seattle. And the rest of the world is very interesting because it's Europe, it's US and Canada, and Latin America. And we have Federico from Argentina who works on Latin America, and 4 graduate students, one of whom is Chinese, working with us as well in other parts of the world. So after the survey is completed, we lock the information into a database, and it will not be changed once we say we've completed the 2019 survey. You can't go back in and actually change any of the data that's there. The country reports will be available both to the countries and publicly online. And anyone like yourselves who might want to dig into and research and needs access to the central database can just ask for access, and we'll give it to you. We need to be able to know who's using it, and we want to know why, of course, but we're not going to block anyone from using it. We plan to do some special reports ourselves. We're required by USDA agreement to report on McGovern Dole countries, but we highly encourage, and one reason for having this meeting today, even before we finish the survey, is to get people excited about how they might use the data and start planning for additional research and reporting once we have completed the survey. Then we plan to repeat the cycle. We'll make any modifications needed by the end of 2020, because under our grant agreement, we will be doing the second survey in 2021. And that will basically be an update of the 2019 survey, so it should be much easier for countries to respond to at that point. And then, as I said at the outset, we plan to repeat the cycle every 2 to 3 years. So I won't go into great depth. I've already mentioned some of the challenges that we're facing. We still have translation issues. We still have challenges identifying the right person in government to respond to, but nonetheless, we're moving on. We have conducted preliminary outreach to 161 countries as of last week. 63 have confirmed focal points. Survey is in process in an additional 26 of those countries where we have focal points confirmed. 14 have actually submitted the survey in some form. And 4 we consider complete, one of which is New Zealand, which has no program, so it was a snap. Another is EBO has helped us greatly, and USDA has completed the U.S. survey as best we can. U.S. is so complex, it was really hard for them to respond, I'm pretty sure, to the survey, but we really appreciate it. We don't yet have any of that data in the online database. We're still setting that up, but we hope to start implementing that soon. And then just to show you what the reports look like, if you haven't seen them already, and they will be available for discussion, and they were available at the registration desk. This is Nepal. Nepal has been a real star in the survey process, partly because Mamta is there and working with them and knows them well. But they have really done a fabulous job of documenting their program and being the first ones out of the gate. There's some very interesting data that comes in the survey. What we're trying to do with the country reports is to capture the highlights of that and make it easy to read and comparable from one country to another as best we can. It's not always possible to line them up. But we have a section on what the names of the programs are, if they have more than one program, the laws and policies that they have in place, budget to the best they can report it, a simple description of key infrastructure issues, what modality, are they doing breakfast, lunch, dinner, take-home rations, whatever, which food, which types of food they're using in their country program, if there are any prohibited items, what the food sources are, and then complementary activities and whether they're mandatory or not. We find that many countries have mandatory programs that aren't being implemented, but first step is that the government is saying that it is required part of the program. Then on the right-hand column, you see that we summarize the number of children receiving food, the trends for the program. This one has gotten very tricky because we ask about preschool, primary school, secondary school, and others like trade schools, et cetera, that some countries feed children in. It's not comparable across all countries, so we're having a little trouble figuring out how to make those graphs and charts legible and comparable from one country to another, and they won't be. They'll be very specific to the type of programs they have. The second page of the country report, we have major categories: nutrition in the first column, agriculture, employment, and community participation in the second column, and then the successes and challenges plus the studies part in the third column. Then for those that have at least one program, we have the programs described on page 3 of the country report. And again, we're trying to compare the programs kind of side by side, so when you read it, you'll be able to kind of cross-check what's different between the WFP program and the national program or whatever. So that's what the country reports look like. And we, as I said, we have examples for you to see here. We owe thanks to all of our partners. Many of you in the room have been helping us out, and WFP and USDA in particular for the support, and the universities that have been involved have been fabulous. So thank you for that. And Mamta, I think it would be interesting if you could talk a little bit about your experience with doing the survey in Asia and Oceania in particular.
I'm not sure how we are doing on the time, whether that's including the Q&A as well, but I'll try to rush through and not go over. Sorry? Okay, it doesn't include the Q&A. Okay, good, good. So I'll try to not go over a lot of things that Arlene has already talked about, but I do want to start with, so the two pieces I want to cover. She's already given the status update. One is the experience and state of mind, and particularly taking from the implementation, which we are currently doing with the team that Arlene had pointed out, and the other is, again, focusing on the partnership even during the implementation. And I'm actually going to borrow directly from our Africa coordinator, Alice, where she is categorized in 4 different categories. The first, we say regroup, reset. These are the countries who agree to participate with the spirit of a true marathon runner, only to drop out before the whistle is blown. So we have those categories of countries we're dealing with. The second is what we categorize as determination and perseverance. Those who are interested but not fully convinced it is a useful exercise, so you know where a bulk of our work is. Then the third, we say, coax and challenge. Those who take off at the speed of a turtle, so what they need is a lot of cheerleading to get to the finish line. And then the fourth is guide and support. Those who run off as the whistle is blown, but run into hurdles and need help to win the championship. So you kind of get a sense of, you know, Arlene mentioned already, we're dealing with more, almost 200 countries, 197 countries according to the UN categorization. So certainly there's a lot of challenge along the way, but I think what we're also learning is a lot of the surprises we're coming along, particularly in terms of the responses we're getting from countries, what it's already mentioned with the US, but you know, so there is the aid supported countries where there's a natural tendency to think there will be more support because of partners that are on the ground. But there are countries, at least from the Asian perspective, where we've got responses from Singapore, Brunei, Thailand, you know, a lot of now what are, again, also defined in the donor country, but also the non-aid recipient countries. So that's been interesting. And the second part that I do want to highlight is, Arlene's already mentioned this, none of this would have been possible without the partnership. It's true, you've deployed a small army, if you will, and our minions that we have. But again, the extent and the scope of the survey, just in terms of the length of questionnaire, but also the countries that we're dealing with. And I do want to, again, echo what Arlene's already said. Our partnership with the World Food Program has been instrumental. Again, you know, we have a lot of our insider talk. We say, oh, we have our usual suspect partners, partnerships, the CRS, Save the Children, World Food Program, you know, those who've been present in the school feeding industry, if you will, Partnership for Child Development. But what we're also learning is collaboration with several new allies that often, whether it's in the forum, we haven't seen their presence. UNICEF, for example, USAID has been instrumental. The Japanese International Cooperation Agency, or JICA in short, as most people know. World Vegetable Center, they're based out of Taiwan. They're looking at a lot of vegetable and now looking at how that consumption can increase nutrition in school. More recently, Nascent Solutions, so many others. And I think this is, again, testament to GCNF's belief that it is about partnership, it is about allies, building allies and coalition. And Catherine, in your remark, you earlier mentioned about it's a movement. And again, like any movement, mobilization is the key factor to its success. So we thank all our supporters in enabling us to proceed with the implementation fees as you know, as less troublesome as it can be, one can imagine. We are excited to see the conclusion of the data collection and moving forward to share the results and have it publicly available for everybody. So thank you. I think we want to spend more time in the Q&A.
Sure. We're going to sit down and we will take questions from you all now.
Hi, thank you very much for hosting us today. My name is Parana and I'm from Botswana. So I'm a female farmer in my country, and I actually run an organization which helps train and capacitate women in the farming industry. And right now what we are trying to do is tap into the existing food meal programs in Botswana, because our country just started a full meal program in primary schools this year, the 1st of April, this month actually. So that's an opportunity for us to get into that. So I'm particularly interested in the work that that GCNF does in the Sea Change for Women program. And I'm trying to understand what exactly it does and how someone like me who's already doing the work we've been doing for the past 5 years with facilitating the training for young female farmers and getting into extending the value chain into our country, how can we work that out? Thank you.
Great question, and we always appreciate when people go to our website, because we haven't talked much about sea change, but it is mentioned in some of our materials and on the web. Sea change, unfortunately, hasn't started yet. It's more conceptual than its implementation, but the theory behind sea change, the concept is that women are very good at managing food safety and quality issues. And that it offers an employment opportunity for women if they're trained to do food safety inspection, food quality, and food management and handling. We had partnered with the World Food Program to develop the concept and to think about how it could be rolled out. We have not yet received adequate resources to actually start. That said, we encourage anyone who is in the field. One of our biggest concerns is about food safety and quality, particularly as you're starting to work in low-income environments where there's not a strong structure in place to guarantee quality. We're really encouraging countries and partners to look at how they can manage to ensure that school food is safe to eat. So the closest we've come around the world is the World Food Program, and almost all of the nonprofits involved in school feeding do cook training in most cases, the cooks that are involved. But we don't yet have the sea change concept of empowering women and helping them to set up in businesses as food safety inspectors. Dr. Bundy in the back.
Thank you very much for this opportunity, and congratulations on bringing this forward. I'm the editor of the recent publication by the World Bank on disease control priorities, Volume 8, Child and Adolescent Health and Development. And I'm going to frame a question in that context, if I might. So Marie Ruel is one of my heroes in nutrition, so I was really listening very carefully to her presentation at the beginning, where she emphasized that the 1,000 days we now recognize as being absolutely as important as anyone had ever said it was. But we also had recognized, and I think this is the important point, that there's been huge neglect thereafter. It is extraordinary that the world invests something like $210 billion, this is lower middle income countries, in education after the age of 5, but only about $4 billion in health and nutrition after the age of 5. And that mismatch is now recognized to be a major constraint on the development of particularly of the poorest countries. And of course, with the launch by the World Bank of the Human Capital Index, it's also become apparent that that's been a long-term neglect, and that realizing the full potential of people needs us to pay attention to school children and adolescents, something that I think every parent was always perfectly well aware of. None of us ever understood that you could sort of look after their health until they were 5 and then look after their education. I don't think that's a strategy that worked very well. So it's a huge change. It's a sea change in the way the world is now thinking about this, and thinking much more crucially about investing in exactly those children that you're now enumerating so carefully in this survey. And I just wondered if you would perhaps want to frame your survey in the context of that real change in the way people are thinking about development. Thank you.
Yeah, Don makes a wonderful point, and he's a total expert in this area. So if you don't know his work, I encourage you to talk with him today. Yes, we are trying to take notice of who is actually expending resources on their future, which requires education, which requires health and nutrition, which requires food security to work. And the beauty of school meal programs is that they bring those 3 pillars of development together in one program. And what's been a shame, I think, is that we haven't done a better job in the past of capturing those 3 pillars and how they interact. And I really hope that this survey can help to not just educate us who study these issues and want to support improvements, but also to show where real progress is being made because that investment is happening. And I think we will see some evidence of those who are spending the most in these kind of activities are getting good results. That's my hope.
So just to add to what Arlene said, and thank you for bringing that up, Dr. Bundy. I was really excited when the adolescent and the 8,000 days, particularly coming from the school meals perspective, where we are constantly trying to engage with nutrition community. That was also brought up in the conversation today. From Nepal's experience, I can, for example, say where there is an acceptance, and this is an entryway and a platform. So something that is getting recognized is that, sure, it's not a treatment, particularly from the wasting and the stunting perspective, but this can become a nutrition sensitive. It's not a nutrition specific intervention, but it's a nutrition sensitive, which addresses a huge age gap. And in many countries, we're also seeing where they are providing food to the adolescent age group. Primarily, so far, the data we've received is the primary age group, but that there's also the adolescent. So there's a lot of interest in the adolescent age group. Again, the connection that we're looking at in terms of the fortification food and the micronutrient that is being provided through school meals, either directly or through complementary services. So those are the pieces that we do see synergies being created, and the story that it will tell, eventually, as again, the partnerships that go moving forward, and the in-depth depth we can look at from the data we've collected to tell a more in-depth study as well.
We have just a couple of minutes more for questions, but we will be here all morning, so yes, Karen.
Hi, Karen Edwards with the American Soybean Association's World Initiative for Soy and Human Health. Congratulations. I'm glad to see such a big task is in such capable hands. I wondered if you could drill down a little bit more on what you're seeing about the food content in the meals, and whether it's got enough protein, for example, or whether that's too early, and how, like, our partners, entrepreneurs making foods for schools in developing countries, how can we continue to keep them updated on your work?
A couple of quick things. We don't drill real deeply into, we ask which foods are used, but we don't know quantities, for example. So it will be a little hard to make that kind of extrapolation. But one of the things we hope the survey does, I was talking with Harold about this earlier, is we hope that through the high-level questions we're asking in this survey, we can pinpoint some areas where we can dig much deeper to understand some questions like that. Now, we do ask about processing and packaged foods, but again, at a very high level. That should give us some ideas of what's happening in that field. And one of the things that stood out in our previous work was the minute countries switch from, we're talking now low-income countries, the minute they switch from imported, donated food to homegrown, locally sourced food, the food basket expands dramatically. Again, we don't have information in most cases about how much of the more diverse foods they're using, but you see an immediate expansion into eggs and fruits and vegetables, et cetera, when they switch from receiving food from McGovern Dole or other programs to purchasing food locally. The time is running out. We have several other questions.
Yeah. Hi, thanks, guys. Taylor Quinn from Just. Quick question on, implementation of programming versus what's being reported. From my experience in Liberia and Sierra Leone, of course, the reality on the ground and what's, the official number in a government ministry are often incredibly different. So, of course, that's really expensive and hard to really figure out in every country in the world, but just curious as the survey evolves, how you guys think about that.
One of the things we did before we got started on the survey was to do what we called country profiles. We dug into the currently available research on every country we could get information from. The key first learning is the information is horrible. It's all over the map. Nothing is comparable. Some countries are extremely well documented and reported on, and others you hear nothing of. So the need for the survey and having a standard way of looking at these things across countries was very clear. But it also, we hope, will guide us, at least in those countries where some documentation exists, to be able to do a quick comparison to what we knew before we did the survey and what's happening according to the report. We know we will not get perfect information, and we know that some people might see this as a way to ask for more food or to over-report what they're doing. We think an advantage of GCNF doing the survey will be a bit more honest reporting, because we're not implementing, we're not offering resources, we are just partners that they've seen in the forums, et cetera, and we don't have any leverage to help them or hurt them. We are just honest brokers, and we're not evaluating their program. We're just asking them to report their program. So we're hoping to get, and as I said on the corruption issue, I've been shocked at the first several surveys I've read how honest people are being about corruption and mismanagement and dangers to their program. So we're hoping it will not be perfect. This is not you're going to be able to validate every child who ever ate in that school meal program that year, and therefore verify the survey results. But we are trying to do as much as we can in comparing notes from the World Food Program, from McGovern Dole reports, et cetera, and our own country profiles to do a cross-check. We do think the information will get better from year to year as people gain confidence from survey to survey, but it's not going to be trouble-free.
Sorry, just we also have the online community getting streamlined, so I believe there's a question.
Yes, so this one's from Mahesh, a principal scientist with the Indian Council of Agricultural Research. Kids in some countries in the developing world, in fact, are overfed too much, such as fats and carbohydrates. Should there be programs in schools on teaching the right nutrition, not just midday meals in poor countries?
You want to?
Sure. That's a really good question. Arlene mentioned already one of the questions we do ask is around obesity. We are asking questions around the use of processed food, or even questions, are there certain types of food that is restricted, whether in school or from around the school vicinity. There is a whole section where we ask about nutrition education. So we do want to see trends where there is a complementary program, and again, school in places where they have school feeding can be a very natural fit. And increasingly, I think that's at least somewhere we've had the same buy-ins from the nutrition community as well, saying we can really use this platform and space to not just feed nutritious food, but actually also emphasize a lot around the nutrition-sensitive education that goes around. Yeah.
Maybe one more question. I know, Marie, you had something you wanted to ask.
My question is related actually to this and concerns whether it would be easy to add some questions about the food environment around the school. You know, are there vendors and are the vendors selling just snacks and fried foods and stuff like that?
We don't ask that specific question. We do ask about restricted items in the school area. And what we're hearing back from many is exactly what you're saying. We have banned vendors, or we don't allow soft drinks, or, you know, that kind of thing. But we didn't ask that specific question. Maybe next time.
Exactly. I think we want to be mindful. So just 2 points, at least I can already think of additional questions as we're thinking moving forward. While I know we have the challenge of completing this round of survey, but for the next round, and also the question you brought about in terms of the macronutrient and the micronutrient contents as well. So those are things, food for us, food for thought as we think about the next cycle. So I think
Yes, thank you. We want to move on to the next panel, please.
Lost those. So I was just saying thank you to everyone for those excellent questions following up Arlene and Mamta's presentation of the early findings of the survey. And I would definitely encourage you to carry those questions with you to the small group discussions that we will be facilitating after the panels that we're going to be hosting right now. I'd love to introduce Dr. Alo, who's going to be coming up to facilitate 2 panel discussions on putting the survey into use. First, from a policy, research, advocacy, and implementation perspective, and then secondly, from a business perspective.
Thank you, Ryan. Hello again. Good morning, everyone. I'm going to introduce the first panel. You have really some eminent speakers joining us this morning. And maybe if I call you, you could come and join us at the front. So first we have Alderman, who is one of the leading specialists in evaluation of social programs, who's really been doing groundbreaking research in the topic for many years, and he's done some wonderful stuff on school feeding, including some really innovative designs looking at the benefits not just to school children, but their younger siblings that we're all sort of learning from. We have Carmen Burbano, who's the director of the school feeding division at the World Food Program, a trailblazer who's been continuing to raise the benchmarks, the already high benchmarks that WFP set itself for school feeding. Then we have Daniel Mumuni, who's the chief of party at the Catholic Relief Services in Sierra Leone. I've been trying to get to the party, but I don't get the invite, Daniel. No, Daniel's a great expert on implementation on the ground, but also in terms of linking with national governments and getting school feeding into policies and plans. And then we have Derrick Lambert from the No Kid Hungry campaign, who's done some wonderful work on school feeding programs in the US. So without further ado, I'll hand over to Harold. Thank you.
Thank you, Alo. Catherine Bertini began showing us a book summarizing what was known about school feeding in 1999. Since that time, there have been some major changes that are important for the school feeding agenda. Universal primary education, many countries have achieved it. Even those countries who haven't have made great strides towards it. Many countries have introduced preschool. Still, preschool enrollment's half of what primary school enrollment is globally, but the trend, it's doubled in the 20 years that I'm referring to. We've had a major change in social protection programs, cash transfers, all over the world now, cash transfers. Some of them are tied to schooling, many of them are not, but they still address one of the goals that school feeding programs address. And since that time, stunting has declined in most countries at a modest pace, and obesity has increased at a rapid pace. So we have a very different environment, and what we know about school feeding, the whole literature, studies that have been done, many of them are about the environment that was there in 1999 and not the environment that's there in 2019. What we have now is a way of getting a better match, a better focus. We see trends in national funding of programs, which parallels the trend in social protection programs. We're seeing that documented in this. We're seeing, again, in this trend towards increasing enrollment, my colleagues working in education say, we've made great strides in getting them kids to school. We're not so sure we've made equal strides in getting them to learn something. And this is where, again, school feeding can come in. Can we design programs that enhance learning? And are we, and I see in the Nepal example, the Bangladesh example that are available, countries are now including education programs, linking them with the school meal program. Now, I am a little doubtful that they have provided the training to the staff, the incentives to the staff to implement these programs, that may address the issues, as we just heard from a speaker from a question in India, that may address issues of poor diets, of bad diet quality, issues around school gardens, if you're going to do school gardens, or just homegrown school meal. Is it really linked to agriculture? After all, we've been trying to get them off the farm into school, and the weird thing, the school is the place to teach them about agriculture when they could have done that if they didn't come to school from their father and mother. So if we're going to do this, we need to have the teachers designing the programs that match the objectives that we're learning from this survey. One other point that I think this survey is going to show us, which is going to be useful for focusing programs, middle and upper income countries right now, this is something that Don Bundy informed me while preparing for the disease control, the disease priority study, that in fact the probability that a student gets a school meal is higher in middle and upper income countries than it is right now in lower income countries. Again, these are countries often which have mandatory primary and secondary education that are often followed. Yet we're still using school meals when there's not the same problems we're seeing in the Burundis and the Burkina Fasos. We have, in fact, two very different sets of programs, very different objectives, and as countries evolve from one trend to another. Okay, I'm finishing up anyhow. As countries evolve to other, we're seeing different objectives for countries as their programs are self-funded, as their problems in nutrition they're more aware of the double burden, and as enrollment is saturated and learning becomes the real stumbling block. I think that when we're seeing the trends globally, the different styles of programs globally that will come out of this survey, we'll be able to focus programs more precisely. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Harold.
Carmen.
My name is Carmen Burbano. I'm the director of the World Food Program School Feeding Division in Rome, and it's a new outfit. It's a new unit in our headquarters office, and it was basically a decision from our executive director to re-energize, reinvigorate WFP's commitment to school feeding moving forward. And of course, this is, as Catherine was mentioning, this is a long-standing program for WFP. It's not that we are just waking up to this issue. It's been a flagship of the organization for a very long time. But I think what's exciting about this new time is what does reinvigorate and a recommitment from WFP to this program mean in 2019? And it certainly is very different from what it was in 2000 or what it was in 2009. 20 years later, 10 years after Rethinking School Feeding, which was a major sort of landmark publication, seminal publication, really putting school feeding on the map for the program, consequential program that it is. This year we are at WFP really thinking about what does it mean for an organization like WFP to support the school feeding agenda moving forward. And that's what this year has been about. And we've been engaging in consultations and in discussions, basically now 8 months, to really try to understand what a strategy moving forward for the organization would look like. And we're pretty close to having, I think, a blueprint for that. And we will be circulating the first draft of what we think is going to be the next 10 years of the strategic direction for the organization. But what is really clear about this moment that wasn't there in the year 2000, that wasn't there in 2009, that we've been building really, is a couple of things that were mentioned by Don Bundy, by Harold, by the rest of the speakers today, is a building consensus of a couple of things. One is, as Don mentioned, a consensus that we need to really rethink or relook at how we are ensuring that children in the school age period have the proper nutrition and the proper health and the proper well-being to be able to take advantage of the education investments that are being made. And a realization that the current investment in that age group, including adolescents, is insufficient. And a realization, and we are here this week actually invited by the World Bank to discuss, because the bank has actually realized that there's a huge gap. There's an enormous investment being made on the supply side of education for these children. So, you know, they're investing for the longest time in schools and teachers and infrastructure and curriculum and whatever, which is really important. But we've sort of forgotten about the kids, about their actual state, about their well-being, whether they're hungry, whether they're coming to school and they have deficiencies, whether, you know, they're obese or they're underweight, et cetera, and how important that is to the impact that that has on their learning ability later on. So that's something that may seem, I think sometimes it's a little odd to talk about this because it's kind of obvious. But there is, I think, a recognition from major players now that we need to rethink this. And that more investment needs to be put in place, not just on school feeding, but a proper package of support to children in schools. That includes, for example, ensuring that they have proper food, but that includes deworming, it includes supplementation, it includes sexual and reproductive awareness, it includes prevention of gender-based violence, it includes WASH, sanitation, and different issues related also to problems specifically affecting girls and their access to education. And so one of the things that we are discussing as part of this WFP new direction is how to engage a global discussion, how to build a global discussion around what needs to get done to support governments to do this. And what is WFP's role in supporting that as a global leader, especially in this area of school feeding. So that's one thing, but I think we are at a point where the evidence for school feeding is as strong as it has ever been. And so instruments like the survey and what GCNF is doing with the survey, and I actually want to congratulate GCNF for the titanic effort because it is very, very complicated to do this, will help us, I think, throughout the years to really track where this movement is going, how governments are expanding their fiscal space, their commitments, their policy priorities in addressing this issue, and will enable us to, as a global body, I think, as a global community, figure out how to support them. From the WFP side, we will use and be very interested in using and consuming the information that's coming out from the survey for our periodic state of school feeding worldwide publications. And the map that was shown by Marie this morning is actually from the 2013 WFP publication. The first map, the first global map on school feeding was published that year. And we are looking forward to updating that publication and those maps and actually being able to track every 2 or 3 years with new publications where we are going as an international community. So that's one of the reasons why we have been such a strong partner and such a strong supporter of the survey with GCNF, and we will be looking forward to collaborating on moving forward with the survey results.
Well, thank you very much. Yes, 5 minutes. We'll try. First of all, let me just say congratulations to GCNF and all the partners, and also to USDA for funding this really important initiative. And I want to start by picking up on the words of Daniel in terms of the progress we've made. Today, when we look at school feeding globally, we are seeing a lot of government commitment. And in Burkina, we are seeing that the national government there is investing about $36 million in school feeding. In Ghana, the government is investing over $100 million a year in school feeding. I would even hazard what Nigeria is investing in, because they are feeding millions and millions of school children globally. And this is a huge shift from 10 years ago. I remember about, I'd say 8 years ago, we were traveling all across Africa, Don Bandi, Professor Bandi, Carmen, Aulo, trying to advocate for national school feeding programs, looking at the policy space, doing a lot of advocacy, supporting governments to develop these policies and providing technical assistance. And we've gotten to the point where we're really seeing a lot of these commitments. And so we're moving on from, the advocacy, not that it's done, but at least we've made some huge gains there. And we are now looking at quality implementation. How do we ensure that the investments that governments are making yields the right results? And then two things come into mind: the issue of effectiveness and efficiency. Because we understand governments have limited resources. They are scrambling. For example, in Sierra Leone, the government has endeavored to invest only $6 million. This is huge. It may seem peanuts in many countries, but it's huge investment in a country like Sierra Leone. So how do we ensure that this investment is used appropriately, that with limited resources we can support the government to ensure efficiency and effectiveness of programming? And I think this is where the survey comes in, helping governments at a glance understand some of the gaps. Because whereas there's political commitment, or let's put it this way, political commitment does not always translate into technical capacity. And so the investments might be made, but then the other issue is, how do we provide the space for quality implementation? And this is where several governments are struggling. And this is where partners like WFP, CRS and the rest come in terms of providing technical assistance and supporting governments, especially with transitioning from externally funded programs to national programs and looking at the issue of sustainability. And so looking at the survey, I was looking through it, and it was very exciting to see some of the issues that we are even contending with in Sierra Leone, for example, where the government makes an investment in school feeding but has no clue about what it takes to actually implement school feeding, that like the infrastructural space, having the kitchens and the needed infrastructure to implement a program, the technical capacity in terms of monitoring and evaluation, and commodity management, food preparation, nutrition planning and all. And I think this is where this survey becomes very important in terms of helping us understand the gaps. And when the government in Sierra Leone were preparing this, it was a very interesting exercise, because you could tell that they were not thinking about some of the issues they hadn't thought of in terms of the implementation. And I think this survey will help us reach the goal of supporting governments implement quality programming. I want to throw a challenge as my 5 minute comes to an end, because when we talk about implementation and the progress that we've made in school feeding, in the last 10 years, we've generated a lot of resources. A lot of knowledge has been generated, from rethinking to school feeding worldwide, the resource framework that has been developed, technical assistance frameworks that have been developed all across. We need to ensure that this survey fits within a particular framework, so governments understand the relevance of the survey, and also systematically we can see how this survey leads to other activities. So for example, it could be a springboard for bringing in another tool like the resource framework. So all the tools that we've developed actually syncs in nicely. And I think this is something that we should look at very critically. And on that note, I would say thank you again, and looking forward to your questions.
Thank you very much, Daniel. Derrick, 5 minutes.
Thank you, Olive. I just want to thank IFPRI for hosting and GCNF for all the work you've done and for bringing us together to talk about the survey and for the opportunity to be on the panel. My name is Derrick Lambert. I work with Share Our Strength. We are a nonprofit organization. I know many people may not know who we are, so we're a nonprofit organization that was founded in 1984 in response to the famine in Ethiopia. Most of our resources at this time are dedicated to the No Kid Hungry campaign, which is focused on expanding access to underutilized child nutrition programs here in the United States. And I was asked to speak to the advocacy implications of the survey, and I'll refer back to the work that we've done around school breakfast, where we see that there is a real gap when we look at school lunch and school breakfast participation in the United States. And a lot of the work that we've done has been around passing legislative mandates at the state level to incorporate alternative breakfast delivery models to make those programs more easily accessible to children and to families. So the implications that I'll be looking at for the survey will come from that perspective. I would also note that we do support 2 additional fantastic organizations, Mary's Meals and the Akshaya Patra Foundation, that deliver school meals in Zambia and India as well. And our work is focused on increasing access to national school meal programs. We feel that there are lessons that we've learned in our work that could be useful, but I also just want to emphasize that we're here to listen and to learn, and we see that as a real upshot of the survey itself. So through the work of the No Kid Hungry campaign, as it pertains to advocacy, we found that progress toward our goals has required three things: elevating public awareness around the issue of child hunger, applied insights from research and practice to inform policy debates, and peer-to-peer networking among administrators and leaders who are implementing potential changes to programs. And we see the survey as a tool to accomplish to make progress in all 3 of these areas. In our work and the work that we've done at the state level with school breakfast, successful advocacy requires a sense of urgency that elevates child nutrition as a priority of government leaders and also of the general public. And we see this as an area where the information that you'll be documenting at the national level could be useful. One thing that's been useful for us is identifying the challenges that we see around child nutrition and school meals as a solvable problem. And in order to do that, we have to articulate what the problem is. In the United States, a lot of folks are surprised to learn that 1 in 6 children live in a family that experiences food insecurity. That's a higher number than most people expect. And so using this statistic as a starting point for our work has been useful to expand access to existing programs that were designed to address these issues, to address food insecurity and provide food in a place of learning, but that are not always delivered in ways that are convenient for children and for families. This survey provides an opportunity for community-based organizations and government leaders to point to gaps in existing coverage in their contexts, and to also identify potential solutions that are place-based in nature and adapted to the capacity of instituting organizations. By articulating both the problem as well as the possible solutions, we find that it's easier to generate public will and also to motivate leaders to address these changes. Second, we think that successful advocacy requires demonstrating the impact of school feeding programs, as Dr. Alderman mentioned earlier, outlining the anticipated benefits of specific policy proposals, and being able to point to examples of successful implementation. When we're advancing our advocacy goals at the state level with specific pieces of legislation, what we often hear from community leaders and from elected officials is, well, where are other people doing this? What do we anticipate the benefits to be? And how would this look? How would we actually roll out this? What would implementation look like? And so, as we're hearing from other panelists here today, and we'll continue, the global survey will facilitate the documentation of relevant research. I was really happy to see that it includes sections for existing studies and research that's needed. This will be helpful to identify best practices and answers to these questions, which can then be applied to specific contexts, dependent on proposals and the operating environment. And finally, we find that successful advocacy requires consultation with and buy-in from stakeholders who would be responsible for and affected by potential changes. So the global survey will facilitate networking between leaders who may have similar operating contexts or who may have already implemented similar policies that can allow folks to identify who those points of contact are that may have experience that's relevant to the situation that they're facing. So in the work of the No Kid Hungry campaign and the work that we've done here in this country, the United States, with regard to school breakfast, bringing folks together to generate public will, identifying leaders who may have relevant context and relevant background, and figuring out how to best identify and incorporate the perspectives of stakeholders and adapt a place-based solution based on the specific needs of a community and the specific outcomes that could be anticipated. We see that as work that's been really important and fundamental to our advocacy, and we see how there are opportunities for the survey to serve a similar role with regard to the work that others are doing. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Derrick. In the interest of time, we have to be a bit flexible. So we'll be taking questions on this panel after the next panel, because the live stream has to end at 11. So if I ask my eminent panelists to find your seats over there, and ask for the new panel members to join me as I introduce you. Thank you very much. So we, in the next panel, we actually have a perspective from the business and private sector. So we have a great set of panelists. We have Rafael Fàbrega, who's the director at Tetra Laval, Food for Development, and also a GCNF board member. We have Eugene Absolom, who's the director of the Tiger Brands Foundation, and we have Louise Iverson, who's the senior program manager at General Mills Foundation. And as for the previous panel, we'll have 5 minutes each, and then we'll collect the questions and we'll ask them at the end of the panel. So let's start with Rafael, please. Thank you.
Thank you very much. First of all, before I begin, I'd like to give a special recognition to Arlene for really making this possible. Thank you all the partners, GCNF and USDA and IFPRI for hosting us today. I'm very excited about this. I've always been advocating for impact data to show the benefits of school feeding and nutrition worldwide. Throughout our history, we've been involved in school feeding and nutrition programs for 56 years now. We support our customers in collaboration with, working in collaboration with governments, NGOs, UN agencies, international aid agencies, now in 59 countries. So we have a very good experience worldwide. We have a global overview of what works and what doesn't work, or some good models that have been implemented. From our perspective, what we look at is really to have sustainable school feeding programs. Now, you need impact data, you need the tools to share best practices, technical assistance between partners. And that's one of the areas that we work on, is we share best practices used in school feeding programs worldwide with all of our partners. So, all right. So within that context, we've been working in so many countries and regions that we feel that some programs are the programs that have been working for many years have a lot of sustainability pillars embedded in them. So they become programs and not projects. So within the context of sustainability, the survey plays a very important role in providing and sharing best practices and providing impact data. Now, the key to sustainability from our point of view is should be looked at along the value chain. So economic development in the agriculture sector, and how many jobs are created in that space. The distribution, processing, and all the supply chain management that goes to providing food safety and quality nutrition to the kids in school, very important. The second area, which I should mention, is community involvement, especially a lot of participation from the parents, teachers, associations. The community really needs to understand the importance of school feeding and nutrition, and of course the impact it's having on their children. Then it's so important to have policy legislation to commit funding for the long term. From a business perspective, that is so important because there's a lot of investments that are made, and the private sector really needs to ensure that there is a sustainable feeding program, and legislation and policy and funding enables that long-term view. So that's important. But in our experience, it's hard to advocate for policy and legislation when you don't have impact data. So the survey plays, again, a very important role to share best practices so countries can learn from each other what has worked, what has been done, and what hasn't been done. And, you know, it's something that we gather a lot from working in all of our, in all of the countries where we work, and we share that. So I think that is a tremendous initiative that is being done here. I know it's not easy. It's a very difficult task. We as a company also do measure statistics worldwide, and I know what what you have up in front of you. But I'm so glad to see that there's a lot of collaboration from many partners that have already been mentioned. So, yeah, thank you.
Hello. So I'm Eugene Absolom. I represent the Tiger Brands Foundation in South Africa. We work on the continent in some of the countries in our sub-region, and we support GCNF in some of the initiatives that they have on the continent as well. And the foundation was established about 9 years ago. We're operational for the last 8 years, supporting the South African government, the education department, in bringing breakfast to learners at schools. In South Africa, at least 15 million people sleep without a dinner every night, and so the breakfast meal is important in supporting the meal that the government serves at 11 o'clock or 10 o'clock each day. So this survey really helps us to find more meaning in terms of our work. We've done a lot of sterling work in supporting the government on the ground in going beyond the meal, and what we call beyond the meal. And I think Carmen spoke about the adjacencies around the meal. And so we do infrastructural support, we do advocacy, capacity building, we do, you know, school kitchens and ablution blocks. We build capacity with principals. And the lady from Botswana that had the question around, you know, how do we empower women? We have, for the meal servers, we have a program where we provide an accredited training to these unemployed women that then leave the services or that 1 year, 2 year contract that they have with the education department and is able to enter the market with a ratified qualification, which sets them up and speaks to SDG 8 around, you know, participating in the economy and gender equality and so forth. But for me, out of the survey really comes 3 key areas that the private sector can get involved in, and my friend Rafael has mentioned most of them. But I would like to say, you know, strengthening the demand, and we would need to provide more opportunity for business and for those that want to become involved in school meals, in terms of cost, in terms of price, in terms of packaging. How do we make it more accessible for them to come on board? The second issue that I'd like to raise is that of, you know, strengthening and enabling environment. So how does government, you know, either create legislation or structure around who comes in or not? And it's not to create barriers, you know, to entry, but it's really regulating in terms of standards. How will they support that effort? But on the other hand, how do we entice business to come in? So it is about, you know, the bureaucracy that has to be minimized and diminished in order to, you know, make it more accessible and profitable for business to come in. The last area is probably that of the supply chain. You know, how do we strengthen the supply chain? And again, we've also done lots of studies, at least 5 studies in the last 4 years around impact and, you know, showing proof of concept. How do we help, you know, those that want to become involved to show that it's working? And so recently we've done a social return on investment a study that shows, you know, the social value and economic value that was added through school meals, you know, in the areas that we're working. We've also just in September commissioned a situational analysis on the landscape of school nutrition in South Africa, and that will certainly also feed into, you know, this kind of survey, you know, that's being done. But for me, the interest would really be around, you know, what is the growth of private sector as we go longitudinal and measure, you know, the impact or the involvement enticement of business as we go forward. You know, how does government close those holes around corruption that you've been talking about, Arlene? You know, so that it also again speaks to, you know, the enticement of business. And then what Daniel has mentioned around the area of efficiencies. I think from a business principle point of view, you know, being efficient and effective in our operations is going to be important. So thank you very much, and we want to join the chorus of congratulating the GCNF as well as USDA on this wonderful tool that they've created. Thank you.
The speakers so far. The private sector has been incredibly efficient. So please, Louise.
Yeah, and noted to be efficient. Hi, everyone. I'm Louise Iverson. I'm a senior program manager at General Mills Foundation. Thank you, IFPRI, for hosting us, and thank you, GCNF, as well. You may know General Mills as a global food company. Some of our brands like Cheerios, Haagen-Dazs, Annie's, Wanchai Ferry in China, Yoki in Brazil. Our purpose is to serve the world by making food people love. And that purpose is really embedded in our philanthropic mission here at the foundation, where we steward the company's philanthropy with the intent of increasing food security. And of course, everyone in this room knows that school feeding is an incredibly effective way to address child hunger and malnutrition. So we do that by working with philanthropic nonprofit partners, many of whom are here today, including No Kid Hungry in the United States, Breakfast Club of Canada, World Food Program in India and China. We're working to ensure that children are well nourished and ready to learn. And I'm also, as others have said, really thrilled that we'll have the school meals survey to better inform our work, to have the data to understand what's the baseline that we're working from and where are those gaps. And you know, we're so fortunate, while it's not perfect, here in the United States with our federal nutrition programs, we do have a lot of data available to us to help us understand where can we have the greatest philanthropic impact. You know, as Derrick mentioned, we know how many kids who are qualify for free and reduced price meals in the United States are accessing school breakfast compared to school lunch, and that can help us inform our strategy. That's very difficult to do in Canada, where we're also supporting school breakfast, and there is no national school meals program.
There will be.
Arlene's on the case. So I think as we look around the world and as a global company, and as we think about these places that our employees call home, we have over 1,800 employees in India, for example. Those employees look to us to say, how are you investing in our communities? How are you investing in our children? Kids eating lunch at India today are also potentially the future workforce for companies like General Mills. And so better understanding how we can work with partners, whether it's World Food Program or others, to ensure that we're having the greatest impact, that we're learning, that we can assess and adjust as needed. And then also, to echo what others have said, that we're responsibly making commitments and investments that are sustainable. Again, I think in the United States, we're fortunate with federal nutrition programs where we can support programs that enable the year-over-year implementation of breakfast models that ensure children have access, because there is a federal nutrition program to draw from. That's very much of interest to us, and I think, and I don't want to put Carmen on the spot, but I think the work that WFP is doing in India with the fortification of school meals is another terrific example of a sustainable investment over time. And so that's the other key piece of information from the survey that I think can help us do an even better job driving our goals forward, working responsibly with our nonprofit partners, and ensuring we're having the greatest and most sustainable effect that we can have.
Wonderful. Thank you very much. So thank you very much again to Rafael, Eugene, and Louise. Thank you very much to our wonderful panelists, and I'm going to hand over to Ryan to close the live stream event. But in the meantime, maybe I'll ask for my panelists to maybe join this side of the audience so we can, after the closing, we can have a bit of Q&A. Thank you.
So this will actually be a reasonably brief close to the live stream event, simply because we were going to pivot quickly into some additional Q&A. But I just wanted to thank everyone who's here today and also everyone who has joined us from the international community online to learn more about school feeding programs and also the direction that a lot of our partners are really hoping that the survey is going to allow us to moving forward. So thank you to everyone who's joined us today. Thank you for everyone who's made today possible. Arlene, USDA, WFP, IFPRI for hosting us here today. I wouldn't be able to list everyone who's made this possible, but it's the best I can do. So thank you so much. I'll turn this over to our panelists, but thank you.
We'll close the live stream event, so thank you very much for those who have joined us online, and we'll now have a